Okay, so this is a little story about how I came around to build a V-twin AJS, which is a replica, an approximate replica of a world speed record attempt bike that was built in around 1929, 1930. But first of all, to put it into context, I want to say a few words about my history with these overhead cam AJSs. Now, the first one I ever had was this one just here. And this is a 1930 R10. I brought this from a guy called Mark Upham, who runs a dealer's. He's a British guy, British only Austria. And I bought it without seeing it from him, and he came over here one day and delivered it for me. And so it looks pretty well as it does now. I've done nothing to it in terms of paint or anything like that. It's literally as it came, apart from the engine and gearbox, because when I fired it up for the first time, there was a clicking noise from inside it, and so it's pretty clear that I was going to have to take it apart. Now, these bikes actually have a long lineage. They started in they first designed in 1926, and they went for the 1927 TT, didn't do very well, as flat tankers, and they issued them as for sale to the public in 1928 as the Model Ks. There's the K7, which is a 350, and the K10, which is a 500. AJS had letters for their years, so K was 28, and then M is 29, R is 30, S is 31, and so on. And after that, they kind of went bust and sold everything to the Collier brothers at Matchless. Anyway, this is one of the first of the saddle tanks. And the design of this was essentially an overhead cam, single overhead cam, chain driven. Unlike the Velocets of the time and the Nortons, which had a bevel drive, they have down here, there's a 20-tooth pinion on the crankshaft, and that drives a 40-tooth gear. There are two sprockets on that. One drives the camshaft up here, and the other one drives the magneto. There's a tensioner in here, Weller chain tensioner, which is a bit of spring steel. And interestingly, exactly the same design was used on the Jaguar XK engines, the early XK engines as well. They also have a very similar tensioner in them. Anyway, I ended up taking it apart and having to remake bits of the crankshaft and put it all back together with new piston, rings, rebore, valves, guides, all the normal things you do. And the gearbox at the same time with new bearings and so on. Since then, I've really done very little to it except ride it, and it starts pretty well first time on the kickstart, which is good. Unlike we'll come on to some of the others which don't. And it's been a pleasure to ride it. It's been to the Manx Grand Prix quite a few times, not racing, of course, as a spectator at the August bank holiday there. And it's a thoroughly lovely bike to ride. Anyway, having got this one and ridden it around for some time, I thought it'd be kind of cool to get a 350. And one came up at a Bonhams auction. And if you look at Bonhams AJS K7, you'll find a picture of one at a Banbury run, pre-Banbury run auction from Bonhams, which is in a pretty dilapidated state. It's pretty rusty. There are pictures of it on my own blog, but you can find it on the Bonhams website as well. And I bought that for quite a lot of money. I think it was about 11 grand or something like that at the time. And started rebuilding it. And it was quite a lot of work. I had to remake all the gears and a lot of internal bits and pieces there. But again, that got rebuilt with new crankshaft and all the other bits and pieces that you do when you're rebuilding a bike. And the whole thing got done, so mudguards, wheels, the whole lot, and it was a lovely bike. While I was doing it, I wondered if I could make one of these engines, and in fact one of the bikes. And I had a little 350 side valve, a 1928 350 side valve at the time, and I picked it up on eBay and got it running. And it managed about 43 miles an hour flat out. So I figured, the frame incidentally is the same on the side valves, the overhead valves, and also the overhead cams. And so I used these castings not from this one, but from the 350 that I got, these large L-shaped castings, there's an inner and an outer. and made some moulds from them, so I could then cast resins for patterns. Right, we just paused for a moment because there's an aeroplane flying overhead. That's the downside of having an airport nearby here. Anyway, I figured that I could use these L-shaped castings just here, these parts, and make some moulds to be able to cast resins from them, which is what I did. And so having done that, I could then make as many resins as I want and then cut and shut those to make patterns for castings. And at the same time, a buddy of mine had a slightly later, 1931, I guess it was, a little 350 engine, which had the crankcases, and they have a 3-bearing crank, so two bearings on the drive side and one on the timing side. Much stronger crankcases than the original 3 little side valves, and they were going spare. So I then did a what if. I've got a lot of Velocet parts, Mark 1 overhead cam Velocet parts, and I just got these castings, the crankcase castings, and just spaced them apart with some washers in between to see if I could get a Velocet cylinder barrel, cylinder head and cam box on there, and I could. So if we now move on to this bike just here, this is the result of these musings in the workshop. So I could make a spacer to move the crankcases apart, and that's what's left of it. That's the shape of a crankcase basically from a SB6 engine. This was water jet cut, so this machined on the lathe to the right thickness, and then this profile was water jet cut by a local company. So I could then sandwich that between the two crankcase halves and move them apart. And if you look very closely on the engine down here, you're going to have to come in and zoom down, right down here. You'll see just there, I'll point to it from this side, you see that spacer in there, that's separated the crankcases by that distance. And that allowed me to put this Velocet, overhead cam Velocet barrel and cylinder head and cam box. If you come around this side, you'll see them a bit better actually. So anyone who runs Velocets will recognise all this lot up here. So that's a Velocet top end on basically a spaced apart AJS bottom end. And these resins, here's one of them, and I've got dozens of these. They're just resin. If you drop it, it'll probably crack and break. This is just normal resin that I've made from the patterns. There's an inner and an outer of these. So with making multiple copies of these and then cutting and shutting them, you can end up with these. These are the actual casting patterns. Looking a bit dusty now. 2 of them, one for the inner and one for the outer chain case. Timing case. So these go off to the foundry and they're cast in aluminium, LM25, and then heat treated. And you can tell it's not quite original because of the distance between the holes here. I've had to extend it a little bit. There's a section which is added in here, so a non-equidistant spacing there. So the castings were then made for this and machined up, and that's what's on the bike. So yeah, back to this side. Those are those castings. AJS used an external oil pump. Now the AJS pumps, there's one on the bike we just looked at, they're like, well, hard to get. So this is a Velocet pump, gear pump encased in a little aluminium housing here, which is driven from the sort of half-time pinion in there. A lot of pipe work. It delivers oil to the other side of the engine, then goes into the crankshaft and the crankcases, and there's a feed teed off of here, which goes up into the cam box to lubricate the cams and the followers up there. The gearboxes on these, you can see the gearbox down here. The gearboxes are different. The gearings are quite different on the overhead valve and overhead cam against the side valve. The side valve has very low gears and quite widely spaced. And there's a guy in Australia that was making close ratio gears. So I got a set of gears from him, complete set of gears, put those in there, so it has a set of close ratio gears in there as well. The tank is not, this would originally have been a flat tanker, so there's two frame tubes here and the tank's sandwiched between them. But I put on here another tank that I had made, so it's like a sort of, it's not actually a pannier tank, but it's like the sort of racing TT tanks that they had at the time. And yeah, I did the rest of the bike, all the usual things, mudguards and brakes and all the rest of it. It's a Tiger Cub hub in the front. I didn't have an original hub, which is quite a small brake. Tiger Cub hub in there. And that's about it really. I've fired it up, it goes like a Mark 1 KTT and stops like a little AJS. And it handles okay. It goes pretty well. It's been to the Manx Grand Prix. I go there as a spectator every year when I can, apart from the last 2 years. And rode it around there, around the lanes of West Sussex. It's not very convenient for taking to the pub because it's got no kickstart on it. The kickstart would normally have gone through there, but I've used that, as they did on the races, for the footrests. Runs a straight exhaust, which is pretty loud. Not as loud as the V-twin, but it's fairly noisy. And yeah, it's a lovely little bike to ride. Personally, I find it a bit small. As you can see, I'm fairly tall, and it's like a sort of large roller skate really for me, which is why I end up sitting on the bump seat most of the time, because I simply don't fit on the bike. But it's a nice little bike and it goes extremely well. What other technical details? Yeah, the Velocette barrel and that's all been rebored. It's running with a new piston. I got a batch of 4 made by company JE Pistons. They're in the US, in California. They make racing pistons and total seal rings and a Nickersill bore, which is probably quite unusual for bikes of this age. And it goes extremely well. As I say, not very convenient for taking to the pub. Without a kickstart, you really need a hill. I don't enjoy running and jumping these days. The main issue to sort out on it was the cam box lubrication. Because you either end up with too much or too little. I had to put a tap in the system here to try and control the oil flow up to the cam box, because the Velocette pump moves an awful lot more oil than the AJS one these engines would have had originally. And if you're not careful, you get oil just pouring out all over it. I've managed to empty an oil tank after about 2 hours, and then you turn it down and you cook the cam if you're not careful. So that took a lot of sorting out, but it's all good now. Anyway, that's a lot of fun. In the meantime, I sold the K7 and I bought a K10, which is the 500 flat tanker. I rebuilt the engine on that and bought it off a buddy of mine and then sold it back to him actually, and I believe it's now in a museum somewhere in Hungary. That was a lovely bike, that went like stink. And anyway, while I was making this one, I came across let me just grab a picture from a magazine here. Right, so when I was building this one, I came across, I was already aware of it, but I came across there was an article in the Classic Motorcycle. Can't see what month it is. Anyway, there's a picture in here of this brute, which is a one-off V-twin that was made by AJS, and this is the first incarnation of it. It's not supercharged at this time, and it's essentially two of the first one we looked at, the R10 over there. It's two of those 500s, the barrels, heads and everything, on a 50-degree V-twin crankcase. And it was built for an attempt on the world speed record, which it didn't get. It made about 130 miles an hour. The world speed record at that time was, I think, about 134, 137, somewhere around there, held by the Germans. And they took it away after this and supercharged it. They put a supercharger on the front and had another go. And I think they eventually got up to about 134 miles an hour on it, something like that. So it didn't quite make the world speed record, but it's an absolutely stunning looking bike. So I wondered, could I do a similar thing and make one of these? And this was then the start of about a 3.5 year excursion into producing this one here, which is what resulted from that. And I started really just, I suppose, thinking about how am I going to make the patterns for the casting. Well, in fact, I looked at castings from other bikes like Jap engines and that kind of thing, but there was nothing that was really suitable. So I figured I'm going to have to make my own. So I started on the pattern work for the castings, and it's quite a laborious process making patterns. You can only do a bit at a time, at least the way I do it, so sticking on bits of material, having made the main cylindrical part of it, sticking on bits for the lugs and all the finning on the other side, for the strength around the drive side main bearings and so on. And now this is a spare casting. I haven't got the patterns to hand. They're up in the loft in my workshop. But this is the drive side casting. This is as they come from the foundry. It's what the spare one. I had 2 sets made of these. And all these bits are actually on the patterns. They're all made of wood and then stuck on with JB Weld and Araldite and whatever. They're quite delicate, so if you drop them, I mean, they would break. And so having made those, then needed the timing cases. And it was then a question of making more resins, lots and lots of resins, and essentially just gluing them all together. And again, they're cut and shut. These are actual castings. The patterns are inside there in the workshop. This is what they look like on the inside, the castings when they come back. And obviously the patterns look exactly like this. And that's the inner timing case, and this is the outer one. And that guy just, when it's all machined, bolts on there. And the oil pump goes on there, and dozens of screws, 30 plus screws actually, that go around there. So those are the main castings for this. A lot of work in making those and then machining those up. The drive to the camshafts is essentially the same as these. So there's one gear, it's a 40-tooth gear that's driven by a 20-tooth pinion on the crankshaft. And instead of 2 sprockets, there are now 3. One obviously for driving the front cylinder, one for the rear cylinder camshaft, and one for the magneto out the front here. The cam boxes, as with the single cylinder, if you're using, again, these are Velocet cylinder. I've got a lot of Velocet bits. These are Velocet cylinder barrels, cylinder heads, and cam boxes. And the cam is on their own cam shafts in here, which are extended, and large bearing housing here with a vernier adjusters on the end to set up the timings. This is running with Ducati pistons in it, Ducati 350 pistons. There's 76mm bore. The crankshaft, I had to make the crankshaft in here. I managed to find a big end assembly, which is actually a Harley Davidson Evo with 7 inches, 7/16 between centres, that fitted exactly. It's a knife and fork arrangement, and but the rest of the flywheels and the main shafts and everything, I had to make all of those and put them together. So that's essentially how the engine came together. I'll come on to the chassis in a minute. It's an extremely tight fit, because it's actually quite a large engine really at the end. The chassis, when I started, I had no idea what it was going to go in, and it just so happened that a 1931 AJS SB8, I think it is. Anyway, it's the Sloper 500 Sloper turned up on Car and Classic, one of the auction sites or sales sites rather in the UK here, and so I bought that, and it was a complete frame, forks. There was a front wheel with it. I couldn't use the rear hub because I need a shock absorber. So the rear hub in here it's actually an infield hub, but they were used by Brough and they were used by Norton's because they've got a shock absorber in this side of the hub, and the brakes on this side. So that's where the shock absorber is in the system. It's in the hub over there. The gearbox was the gearbox that came with the bike, which has obviously been refurbished, but that's all good. 3-speed gearbox with an externally mounted positive stop just there. That's from a Doll's Head gearbox, Norton Doll's Head gearbox, which I've recased. That's not the head itself. I had to make all that housing and everything for it. It was quite a squeeze getting the carburettors in here. As you can see, there's very little clearance between these and the carbs and the frame, and even between the tappets as well and the frame. It's quite a tight fit to get all that lot in there. The oil tank, I'm not a sheet metal worker. I'm fine with solid stuff, but I'm really not a sheet metal guy. I can do straight bits of metal, but not really bent stuff, multiple curved surfaces. So the oil tank, what I've done is this tank here is actually started life as a Royal Enfield toolbox. It's off a Royal Enfield Bullet, about 20 something quid off eBay, and there's tons of them around. And I've simply used the curved surfaces on here, one's hidden behind the carb there, all of this lot, chopped a bit out of it here and made a section for it for the filler, and then extended it slightly and put the back on it. So that's where the toolbox came from. The petrol tank, a similar issue really, where to get a right sort of shaped and sized petrol tank for it. And the guys in India have been making tanks for old British bikes for quite some time. I've had some of these before. I've used one on a Norton. I used to travel to India quite a bit. I've got a lot of Velocet tanks I had made out there, and they do a pretty good job in my view. I know a lot of people sort of criticise Indian tanks, but I've only had good experiences really with them. And this started out as a tank because it had the right contours, particularly at the front and the shape of it, for an Ariel Model G. Now, that tank originally has a panel in here, and it has, I don't know, a speedo and a massive filler and everything like that. So I emailed the guys that made that and said, could you make me one of these, except make it 3 inches longer, get rid of this, get rid of that, move the fuel outlet to the middle here, because there's no space to stick it down there. And that's what they did. They made me that tank. And about 6 weeks later it turned up, very fair price. I got it chromed here because I had to silver solder a few bits of things like this is actually from a Vincent. I used 2 of these, one on the valve lifter and one here. These are actually from the Vincent Owners Club for the 1:2 for the throttle. I put on here, the original of these did not have scavenge pumps for the cam boxes, but with the issues that I had with the single cylinder, the AJ set over there. By the way, it's called the AJ set because I'm giving credit to both AJS and Velocet. A lot of people say there's never such a bike, but there is now. The cam box oiling I expected to be an issue, and it possibly even still is. I put on scavenge pumps here, and the first version of this in that picture doesn't have those. But if you look at later pictures of the original, it does have scavenge pumps, and the problem is really getting the oil out of the cam boxes and back into the engine again. So if you come, so these are both gear pumps. I had to make both of these. They're actually the gears I took off from old Sunbeam pumps. I found at an auto jumble and made the bodies for them, and then put them in the aluminium housings there. And if you come around the other side here, you'll see the number of pipes that I've got in here trying to get the oil out of the cam box. So all of these are on the front cylinder, these 2 here, and these I put 3 on here. The rear cylinder as well, because that also a lot of oil ends up in the gutters in the cam box down there, to try and get the oil out of the cam box and back into the engine again. I've also put in, this is a little Model Engineering pressure gauge, Norton 30 psi pressure gauge in here, and a little tap to try and set this to, I haven't found the right pressure, it's somewhere around 5 psi, to get the right amount of oil going up there, up to the cam box, and also flow restrictors. Otherwise the oil just pours out of them. The clutch, I made the clutch. It's basically uses Norton plates, but it's a 6-spring Sturmey Archer end on it just there, and that works pretty well. It's reasonably light as well. When I first ran it, I had a magneto on there, BTH V-twin, 50-degree V-twin magneto. But I only ever got it to fire up once on that. I had a problem with it. So I went to this BTH, this one down here, this BTH self-generating mag. And they're pretty good. I put one, I had a Vincent Black Shadow some years ago. I put one on there and it would always start, first time on the kickstart. It was absolutely superb. So I just put one of those on there. And it has external coils, so, and they're mounted in this little packet just under there. Yeah, what else can I say about it? Yeah, there's another 2-into-1 for the valve lifter just here. The valve lifter which operates, if I operate it, you can see down here, there are 2 valve lifters on there. There's a 1-into-2 just there, that's 1, and then 2 to operate both valve lifters. The exhaust pipes, I had to make the exhausts, and it's not so easy with these because when they're upright engines, the exhaust comes out pretty well horizontally or maybe slightly down, but with 50-degree V-twin it's pointing up in the air, so there's some quite tight bends in here. That's not my best bit of sticking them together. The other one looks a bit better than that actually, if you come around the other side. They're made up of multiple sections and then just tacked together, welded. I get the bends done by a company down in Worthing here, Pipecraft. So they make the bends. There's a bend there, there's another one there, another one down there, and I just tack them and then weld them all the way around and clean them up. It's set up with just straight exhaust, as is the original, but I've put some little muffler things in there at the moment to try and quieten it down a bit. It is still fairly noisy. It's actually not a large bike. Looking at the original, it has quite a long wheelbase, the original. That was a one-off frame that they made for it, one-off chassis. But I'm kind of got what I've got, and these weren't particularly large bikes, at least not we would consider large bikes these days anyway. So it's if you've got short legs, you wouldn't have any problem riding it. Yeah, that's about it really. It hasn't had a lot of road time yet. I've been up and down the road on it, but I finished it around beginning of December, somewhere around there, December 2021. And then it just poured with rain for weeks on end, and then it's been cold and miserable after that, and I don't particularly enjoy driving in the cold and wet these days, so I'm just waiting for some warmer weather to shake it down. Anyway, there it is.